Effects of nitrogen pollution. The nitrogen cycle is one of the most critical ecological cycles on Earth. Nitrogen plays a vital role in plants, animals and humans. Effects of nitrogen pollution can not only lead to poor air quality but also have many other adverse effects on our planet. This article discusses how nitrogen pollution is ruining our world and what we can do about it. Effects of nitrogen pollution on human health. Nitrogen is one of those pesky chemicals that you don't even know about but could be hurting your body without knowing it. We all think of pollution as being a dirty word when really it's much more than just dirt on sidewalks or excess dust in our homes. No matter how hard we try to keep things clean, pollutants are going right through them into our lungs and bloodstreams despite what they're made out of. Nitrogen trapped from cars' exhaust pipes causes health conditions such as asthma attacks, which can have long-lasting consequences like heart disease for adolescents who experience these types of episodes frequently over their lifetime. Nitrogen has been shown to have a profound effect on your respiratory system, cardiovascular function and central nervous system. Clinical studies show that air pollutants can cause asthma in children, as well as increase risk for pulmonary diseases like chronic bronchitis or emphysema later in life with prolonged exposure to high levels of nitrous oxide, N2O. In addition to this environmental harm, however, there are also many implications regarding fertility rates within women who live near significant sources such as power plants and industrial zones where they may be exposed at a higher concentration than other Americans because their homes might not provide adequate ventilation due to increased outdoor traffic from bus routes or factories, which could lead them being more likely. Effects of nitrogen pollution on ecosystem. Nitrogen can have a really negative impact on plants, animals and other living organisms in both natural environments like forests and oceans as well as artificial systems such as agricultural regions. Nitrogen is an essential element for life because it's used by all cells to make proteins needed for growth, but too much or not enough nitrogen leads to some serious problems. Nitrogen's effects on ecosystems affect both human health and animal life negatively because it causes damage across all areas from affecting ground surfaces through our atmosphere, resulting in harmful gases produced when they react chemically with sunlight, creating sulfuric acid droplets known as acid rain. Effects of nitrogen pollution on aquatic life. Nitrogen pollution is one of the significant causes for aquatic life to decline. Nitrogen pollution from fertilizers, animal waste and sewage often move downstream into lakes, where it lowers levels of oxygen by causing algal blooms, which compete with other species in the ecosystem for this vital substance. The nitrogen then transfers out through effluent plants, but there are some studies that show these methods can still release large amounts back into our waterways because they aren't high enough tech or efficient enough yet. Nitrogen pollution caused by fertilizer runoff and wastewater releases nitrates as a side effect when those waters try to balance their pH level again after administering chemicals like ammonia or hydrogen sulfide ammonium salts. These types of toxins cause dissolved oxygen levels in water bodies such as rivers. Nitrogen pollution, found in fertilizers and chemical compounds used for industrial purposes such as manufacturing plastics or paint, which seep into waterways. Chemicals like nitrogen can cause toxic algae to bloom that depletes the water of oxygen, killing fish populations and other aquatic animals. Effects of nitrogen pollution on animals. By now, it is well known that nitrogen pollution affects a variety of animals. Birds are significantly affected because they feed on earthworms and insects, which ingest the polluted soil as they travel around in search of food. Nitrogen has been found to have adverse effects on many different types of animals, such as birds, who rely heavily upon invertebrates like worms or bugs to get their nutrients from eating them while looking for their next meal. The harmful effects of nitrogen pollution on animals and the environment is a complicated topic to tackle. Nitrogen in fertilizers can be hazardous for ecosystems but also has many benefits, such as being an essential component of living organisms like plants or bacteria. However much we know about this process, it will always remain shrouded by mystery because there are so many factors that come into play. Effects of nitrogen pollution. Effects of nitrogen pollution on plants. Nitrogen pollution is a significant issue for many plants. Studies show that as nitrogen levels rise, the leaves on trees and shrubs become smaller in size with less chlorophyll than they would naturally have without interference from other substances like air pollution or fertilizers. These changes can lead to negative consequences such as the increased risk of death during droughts because bark cannot provide sufficient protection against heat loss when leaf area declines so dramatically, or significantly reduced productivity due to stunted growth rates, which make it difficult for plant species to compete effectively with natural enemies including insects and fungi. Plants are the backbone of our ecosystem. They provide oxygen for us to breathe and clean up pollution in nature, but they can't do their job without help from humans, who must reduce nitrogen levels, so plants don't die off too quickly or before reaching maturity. Effects of nitrogen pollution on climate change. Nitrogen pollution is making it harder to slow the effects of climate change. Nitrogen can contribute a lot to greenhouse gas emissions when left unprocessed, impacting local weather and global temperatures alike. The nitrogen in natural fertilizers like manure or fertilizer burns up into nitrous oxide, which then enters the atmosphere where it traps heat energy from escaping back out into space before leaving as infrared radiation. Instead, this has led scientists to predict that changes will need to be made, so we don't continue adding more pollutants on top of what already exists if our goal is for things not become worse over time. Effects of nitrogen pollution on global warming. Nitrogen pollution is a severe issue when it comes to global warming. Nitrates from fertilizers and fossil fuels have washed into water bodies, which caused many of them, like the Gulf of Mexico, to become deoxygenated. Fish are dying off because they can't survive without oxygen in their environment. This impacts local economies as well as food chains for other species that go extinct by being deprived of access to these fish sources. Nitrogen pollution has been one of the factors in global warming on Earth. Nitric oxides are a significant contributor to this type of environmental issue, and they create nitrous acid when they come into contact with water vapor or ozone. This is why it's so crucial for people to understand how nitrogen affects climate change, because these pollutants have an effect on our environment that may be irreversible if left unchecked. Effects of nitrogen pollution. Effects of nitrogen pollution on agriculture. Nitrogen is an essential component in agriculture. This element helps provide plants with nutrients, and it also provides a buffer against environmental stressors such as drought, pests, or disease. However, because the atmosphere now has more nitrogen than ever before due to human industrialization of land use practices like farming and burning fossil fuels, creating air pollution, which causes acid rain that leaches heavier metals from soil, contaminating crops, while other toxic chemicals are released into our water supplies by factories removing pollutants including mercury vapor through their smokestacks. These factors combined can have adverse effects on agricultural production all over the world, leading to food shortages for animals, livestock, humans alike. If this continues unchecked, we'll see what happens next. Effects of nitrogen pollution on the economy. There are a number of ways that nitrogen pollution can affect the economy. It may negatively impact those who depend heavily on agricultural production for their livelihoods, because farms require lots of fertilizer to grow crops, and if these farmers cannot find enough clean water or money to use this expensive nutrient, they often turn to cheaper alternatives like manure, which have much higher levels nitrate than normal fertilizers. So more runoff ends up in drinking supplies when the ground becomes saturated from rainwater, then is carried into sewers, resulting in contaminated tap water with dangerous amounts nitrates. Nitrogen also damages trees lining streams by preventing them from absorbing oxygen, as well as causing algae blooms that suffocate fish populations due to easily toxic substances such as ammonia being released through. Nitrogen pollution is a global issue, and it has the capability to devastate our economy. The use of nitrogen fertilizers during large-scale agricultural production can lead to an excess release into water sources and create what is known as dead zones, regions with oxygen-depleted waters that cannot support marine life or provide economic sustenance for fishing communities. This poses not only ecological consequences but also social implications on livelihoods in coastal areas around the world, which depend mainly on fisheries for their primary source of income. Effects of nitrogen pollution. Effects of nitrogen pollution on the ozone layer. The nitrogen in our atmosphere is slowly causing the ozone layer to thin. This has a lot of adverse effects, one being that it damages plants and humans alike. Nitrogen pollution affects life on Earth by blocking out UV rays from reaching us, which blocks some plant growth and can lead to cancer. Nitrogen also contributes to acid rain because when these two gases come into contact, they form nitric acid droplets. Nitrogen is one of those elements that are necessary for life, but it's also a pollutant when in excess and with specific chemical reactions. Nitrous oxide, N2O, has an effect on ozone depletion because this gas is long-lived enough to reach stratospheric levels where most protection against UV rays occurs, which helps provide us with some relief from skin cancer rates as well as other forms of radiation damage like cataracts or blindness. Effects of nitrogen pollution on acid rain. The brown cloud that hangs over our planet, threatening to suffocate us all in its toxic embrace, is the result of a chemical imbalance. Like an acid bath on metal or organic material, All living things. Nitrogen pollution has been steadily pouring out into Earth's atmosphere for decades now. Once there, it reacts with water and oxygen molecules to form nitric oxide, which contributes to smog and acid rain. Nitrogen will continue polluting until we take action, by using fossil fuels more responsibly while also investing in clean, renewable energy sources like wind power. Effects of nitrogen pollution on non-living things. A new study found that rocks made of limestone are less durable when exposed to nitrogen pollution. Exposure to high levels of nitrates can weaken the calcite in these stones, which typically make up about 90% or more of a rock's composition and create its lower structure. This could pose serious problems for buildings and infrastructure if it continues, as sedimentation from fossil fuel combustion has caused an increase in atmospheric concentrations over time. Mountains are being affected by nitrogen pollution. The effects of this are evident when considering the fact that plants in these environments have a hard time absorbing it, which leads to an increased growth rate for toxic weeds and other invasive species.